Hey Virgo, if this found you today, I don't think that's an accident. Let's sit with what's actually present here. Because the cards that are showing up right now are not small. They're not asking you to wait indefinitely, to shrink, or to doubt yourself into silence. What they're reflecting is a moment of genuine internal movement, a moment where the foundations you've been quietly building, sometimes without even realizing you were building them, are beginning to feel more solid beneath your feet. There's something the cards almost always reveal when this kind of energy is present. It isn't the dramatic announcement, it's the quiet hum of alignment, the feeling that something is finally starting to belong to you. And it's possible you've been standing in front of that truth for longer than you realize, hesitating, second guessing, wondering if you're reading the signs correctly. The first card in this spread is asking you to stop second guessing, not because certainty is guaranteed, but because the hesitation itself may be the only thing still holding a door slightly closed. There's a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from waiting in uncertainty. And some of you have been carrying that exhaustion for a while now. It's not the tiredness of doing too much, it's the tiredness of not knowing, of waking up each morning and feeling like the ground beneath you is still a little too uncertain, a little too soft. And what's interesting is the cards aren't dismissing that feeling, they're actually acknowledging it. Because what comes before stability is almost always a period of not having it. And many people who are navigating this kind of energy right now have spent a significant amount of time in that in between space, that corridor between what was and what is slowly becoming. This reflection invites you to consider what it would actually feel like in your body if the ground beneath you became truly steady, and whether some part of you is still bracing for the unsteadiness to return, even when it hasn't. The second energy showing up here is deeply connected to the concept of home. And I want to be thoughtful with that word because for different people, home means very different things. For some, it's a physical place, a new space that carries a different energy than where they currently are. For others, home is an internal state, is less than #0. 5# is greater than that feeling of finally being settled within yourself, within your choices, within the version of your life that you're building. The cards aren't distinguishing between these two interpretations. They're holding both because it's possible that for many of you, the outer shift and the inner shift are happening at the same time. That as one begins to feel more settled, so does the other. Um, there's something almost haunting about this particular combination of energies. It feels like standing in a space that used to feel dark and slowly noticing that the light has been creeping in through the edges. Not all at once, not in a way that announces itself, but incrementally, quietly, like how sunrise doesn't happen in a single moment. It happens in layers, each one a little brighter than the last, until suddenly you look up and the room is no longer dark. And this is where it gets subtle because some of you may be so accustomed to the darkness, so practiced at navigating the uncertainty, that the light, when it arrives, might feel almost unfamiliar, like you don't quite trust it yet, like you're waiting for something to go wrong again. And the cards are gently asking, what if nothing goes wrong this time? What if this is simply what it feels like when things actually begin to work in your favor? There is a shadow that follows people who have been through financial instability or housing instability or any kind of foundation level disruption. And that shadow doesn't always disappear the moment circumstances begin to change. Sometimes it lingers. Sometimes it whispers old stories into new moments. Stories like, this is too good. Stories like, you don't get to keep this. Stories like, something is about to take it away. What's showing up in this spread is an invitation to begin questioning those stories, not to ignore the wisdom that comes from lived experience, but to notice when that wisdom has calcified into a reflex, into a default setting that no longer reflects what is actually present. This reflection invites you to consider which stories about scarcity or instability you're still carrying that were written in a chapter of your life that may no longer define where you are now. The third thread running through these cards is the energy of material shift. And again, I want to be careful here because this isn't about promising you a specific outcome or a specific number. What the cards are reflecting is a psychological and energetic movement around your relationship with resources, with money, with the feeling of having enough. For many people navigating this kind of reading, there's something shifting in how they're approaching that relationship. Some are beginning to make decisions that feel more aligned. Some are starting to release patterns of self-sabotage around abundance is less than #0. 5 is greater than those quiet, almost invisible ways people sometimes undermine their own stability before it can be taken from them by something else. As if the taking is inevitable, so they might as well be the one doing it. Here's the thing. The energy of true stability, not the temporary kind, not the fragile kind, tends to arrive not in one dramatic moment, but through a series of small, almost unremarkable decisions, choices that at the time don't feel significant, boundaries quietly held, opportunities quietly honored, values quietly lived. And it's possible that many of you have been making those kinds of decisions without fully registering what they're adding up to. There's an echo in these cards of someone who has been carrying the weight of a situation for longer than they perhaps should have had to. Someone who has been resilient, maybe even quietly heroic in circumstances that asked a great deal of them. And what the cards seem to be reflecting is that this period, this particular corridor of difficulty, is not the permanent landscape. It has been a passage, a demanding, sometimes disorienting passage, but a passage nonetheless. And sometimes the hardest thing about approaching the other side of something difficult is that you don't always realize you're approaching it. You're so accustomed to the walk, to the weight of the steps, that you don't notice when the road begins to feel is less than hash zero. 5 hash is greater than a little less heavy, a little less uphill. Some realizations arrive quietly, like footsteps in a dark hallway, and only later do you understand what they were announcing. This reflection invites you to consider the ways in which your resilience has been quietly reshaping your life, and whether you've been giving yourself credit for the distances you've already traveled. There's a fourth dimension to this reading that I feel called to sit with for a moment, and it has to do with the idea of deserving, because buried beneath the surface of many people's relationship with stability and abundance is a quiet, sometimes barely conscious belief that they don't quite deserve it, that something in their past, a mistake, a loss, a period of chaos, has somehow disqualified them from the life that feels possible now. And these cards are not interested in that story. Not because difficulty doesn't leave marks. It does. Not because the past isn't real. It is. But because the marks the past leaves don't have to become the walls of the future. What's interesting is that the energy present in this reading doesn't feel like luck. It doesn't feel like something falling from the sky. It feels earned. It feels like the slow, almost geological result of pressure applied over time. And there's something deeply important about that distinction, because when we understand a shift as something we've participated in creating is less than hash zero, 5 hash is greater than, even in the smallest, quietest ways. It becomes something we're more capable of sustaining, something we can stand inside of with a different kind of confidence. Some of you may be on the edge of a decision right now, something that requires you to move toward what feels possible, rather than retreating toward what feels safe only because it's familiar. And familiar isn't always the same as safe. Sometimes the most dangerous place is the one you've grown too comfortable in, because it keeps you from reaching toward something more aligned. The cards aren't pushing you. They're not demanding anything, but they are holding up a kind of mirror and asking, what are you actually afraid of here? And is that fear protecting you or simply keeping you in place? There's a particular card energy present in this reading that I associate with the concept of new walls, new ceilings, new light coming through windows you haven't looked out of yet. And that imagery, even taken purely metaphorically, carries something worth pausing on. Because new spaces, whether physical or internal, have a way of allowing new versions of ourselves to emerge. There's something about a changed environment. Even something as small as rearranging a room, let alone the possibility of a genuinely new place, that can quietly signal to the nervous system the old chapter is over. You're allowed to be someone slightly different here. This reflection invites you to consider what version of yourself might be possible in a space, physical, emotional, or psychological, that isn't carrying the accumulated weight of everything that came before. The closing energy of this reading is one of the more tender ones I've felt in a long time. There's a softness to it, an almost tentative joy, the kind that hasn't quite let itself be fully felt yet, because it's been waiting to see if it's real. And I think that's where many of you are right now, standing at the edge of something that might be genuinely good. Not perfect, not without its own challenges and adjustments, but genuinely, quietly, meaningfully good. And the cards are not asking you to perform certainty about that. They're not asking you to leap before you're ready. They're simply asking, can you let yourself be open to it? Can you make just a little more room in the space between your ribs for the possibility that things are shifting in a direction that is actually aligned with what you need? Not every truth announces itself loudly. Some simply linger in the background, waiting to be noticed, waiting for the mind to become still enough to register what has quietly been building and the happiness that might be approaching. If you allow, the word isn't likely to arrive as a single thunderclap of transformation. It's more likely to arrive the way warmth returns to a room in winter, gradually, almost without announcement, until one morning you wake up and realize that the cold has been gone for some time. You hold the understanding of your own life more deeply than any reading ever could.